Hello and welcome to one of the events for educators in VR. This is part of the cyberbullying events and team, and I'm Lance Wesky, and I'm here with Sonya with cyberbullying. So take it away.
Thank you so much, Lance. And before I get started, I wanted to thank Laurel for helping with the slides today and for Educators in VR for hosting this and having me here to chat with you guys. So basically, I'm going to talk with you some about the state of social VR. And that covers a broad spectrum, basically, because we are social creatures. And so social means that, we're doing things with other people. But in the context of virtual reality or immersive reality, we're kind of changing that definition a lot, and we're deciding where to go with that. What does that mean? Does social interaction mean that you have to be in a physical environment with someone? Obviously it doesn't. We've all figured that out or we wouldn't be here today. And what does it mean, like, if we're in an environment like this but other people are reacting on a phone or a desktop computer? So or if you have a community that you're developing and you have people who are coordinating events or hanging out on Discord or Facebook. So there are a lot of these kind of things that are changing our perceptions of what it means to be social and interact with others. And so it's a really exciting time, I think. I wanted to start out just by going through some facts with you, and then we have some little bit challenging topics to go over today, but there are a lot of good news and there's a lot of good information about social VR as well. So first of all, just some basic facts, which you guys can find these, but I wanted to present them out there to you. The global AR and VR market is growing rapidly, and we expect 209.2 billion by next year. And there are currently more than 171 million VR users worldwide. And if I'm not mistaken, that actual statistic is from a couple years ago, so that's larger than that now, I believe. 78% of Americans are familiar with VR today. That number actually is an important number because most of us several years ago, even just a few years ago, weren't familiar with VR. For me personally, I first put on a headset in April of 2017. I had never heard of VR, didn't have a clue what it was, and my son wanted me to try VR at a Best Buy because he was being deployed to Afghanistan. I put the headset on and immediately thought, wow, this is the most amazing thing I've ever experienced. And so I thought it was just a fascinating, wonderful thing, but I also was really weird. I immediately thought of all these things you could do with it, like talk to other people and hang out and play games. And I thought, if I was too sick to go to the doctor, maybe my doctor could go meet me in that headset. So these were very simple thoughts at that time, from a person who wasn't familiar with technology. But at the same time, they were thoughts that I, as a non-user who was completely unfamiliar with the technology, thought just based on the impression that it gave me right off the bat. Let's see, the AR/VR headsets projected sales of over 30 million units by 2023. The VR gaming industry global revenue is expected to be 2.4 billion by 2024. I'm going to go back to that a second. The reason these numbers are important is just to show you some of the growth. So you guys, I'm sure most people in this audience are familiar with a lot of these numbers, but I actually probably reach a lot of non-VR users. Like, that's kind of my target audience, is to bridge the gap between the non-tech people and the tech industry, because there's, as you guys know, there tends to be a pattern of talking among ourselves in the tech industry or any industry where you share that information with each other. But with virtual reality, we have the opportunity to share that with millions of people who've never used the technology and bring them into these social worlds and make them aware that it's an option for them. So it's good for them to know that with these numbers, that it's growing and they can see opportunities there. I put this up here for a specific reason. This is from a study done in China, actually, of Vive users and non-Vive users, and it was from 2017. The numbers fascinate me because based on that study, it was a pretty extensive study in China. There was 94% of male users for Vive and 87% of male users for non-Vive. Now, the numbers are interesting because I think that if you look at this number, for example, 43% of VR AR device owners were women. In more recent statistics and studies that, like surveys I've put out just kind of casually myself, this is more of an accurate number. This is more like a current accurate number of VR users, that there are a lot more women than this using VR. So now some of this, again, is speculation and observation, but the Vive is a fantastic headset. I really like it. It's also similar to the Rift, for example. It was tethered to a computer. And so now we have a situation where we have more headsets that don't require that. And we have a lot of women, for example, that are my age, you know, middle-aged women or middle-aged men, um, school kids, people who maybe don't have access to a gaming computer, maybe aren't that interested in all the tech background, but they really are interested in immersive reality. And so I think this number is more accurate because you're seeing people who maybe want to do the gaming or use it for fitness who have no interest in a big, whole, huge computer setup. And so it just seems fascinating to me from a social VR perspective, because what that says is that these are just average, regular people, not quote tech people. Demographics, recent demographics. This right here, again, is reflective of what I typically tend to see. This is from a survey I did back in the spring. And in this particular survey, there were 64% male respondents and 31% female respondents. This particular survey was about harassment and bullying in virtual reality. And the survey was conducted specifically to try to see how pervasive that was and what we could do to help people. Are there specific tools that we need to use, that sort of thing. So just bear in mind that there were 64% of male respondents and 31% of female, and then you can see the other numbers there. There were about nearly 4% of people who we did not have a response on that question. So whenever they were asked, for example, about different harassment events or social problems that they encounter in VR, like bullying, racism, things like that, 73% stated that the most desirable social tools for them would be in-game report tools. Now, this was back in the spring, and since that time, I know some headsets like Oculus Quest, for example, have implemented improved reporting measures, and that's important because people do want to use those things. There was another question, it's actually not on here, but there was a question that stated, if you have experienced harassment, did you report it? Yes or no? And there was like, I believe it was 54% stated, that wasn't 54% that didn't report it, but of the ones that didn't report it, 54% of those said the reason they didn't report it was because it was too complicated or they didn't know how. And that's important because that's basically like saying, if someone comes up to you and commits a crime, for example, well, you're just going to ignore it and either leave the environment or deal with that, whatever sort of consequences upon yourself, because you didn't know who to tell or how to tell them. And so it's important that we have in-game report tools so these people feel empowered and able to do something about those sorts of situations. The other things that they requested or stated that they would like to see are directly related to social VR. 61% said that they wanted to enter friends-only safe spaces. I don't particularly like the term safe space because I think everywhere should be, quote, safe. Like, we shouldn't have to go to a special place to not be harassed or bullied or have fun. I mean, you should just be able to go like anywhere you want and have an enjoyable time. But with that said, that was one of the most widely chosen options, that people wanted to be able to go into areas with their friends only and nobody else there. They also wanted events or activities for specific groups. This can be something, for example, like if you have parties or get together and you have special codes, and you can invite people to that code or that with a code to a special lobby or an event. And so that's kind of important. Those numbers are just general, give you a general idea of what's going on with people's thinking. So another thing from that survey, these are some other results from that survey. VR social interaction versus physical reality. So I'm going to hang off on that one for just a second and go back to some other ideas here. Now, for those who are in this room, you're most likely familiar with, very familiar with social VR already. But basically, when you think about social VR, there's so many different ways we can look at that. You do have apps in VR that are created specifically for the purpose of social interaction. Like, for example, Spacer, VR Chat, Rec Room, Big Screen, Neos, Orbis. These are things that were made to be social VR apps. People can go in there, they can hang out, they can have their worlds, they can have a good time with friends. You meet other people, and that's really great. You also have something like Verbella, for example, where you can go and have classes or meetings, and I do some presentations in there occasionally as well. All these types of things, they may be used sometimes for fellowship or get-togethers. Like Space is great for that with some of the parties and stuff, or they may be used for training and things like that. Then you also have games, for example, that were not really intended to be, quote, social VR apps, but maybe they were intended to be specifically just for the purpose of gaming, like Echo VR, Population One, Onward, Star Trek Bridge Crew. All those things were created as games, but the fact of the matter is that they've turned into social VR experiences. People go in there and they hang out with their friends. They create teams. They have fun together. They have meetups, and so those are all things that we see with the evolution of social VR. That I think that's important. Same thing with something like Facebook Horizon or Demio. So basically, if you have a situation where you're in physical reality and you're meeting your friends, or it doesn't matter what your interests are, your hobbies, but if you go to certain areas or groups, like if you have a synagogue or a church group or a school group or a educators group, whatever it is that you do in your physical reality, and you go hang out with those people, then you tend to go and do things with them and have fun. And obviously, those of us who are in here in VR all the time, we know that that's what we do in VR as well. And so it's really nice to see the opportunities growing for people who really want to be in VR with others and hanging out. I'm going to go back to that slide real quick that I skipped a second ago. So check out these stats. This is really fascinating. This is what the question I did back in the spring. Most of my social interaction is in the whole thing of that is most of my social interaction takes place in VR environments. That was what that whole thing said. Think about that a second. Like, this is now from the ages of people that completed that survey. There was it was probably, I don't know, 30% or something of young people under the age of 18. But that means 60% of these people or so were over, it was like 30% plus, and 60% plus was over the age of 18. A lot of those between the ages of 25 and 35. Most of my social interaction takes place in VR environments. That's 44% of people. Now, granted, I did this survey back in the spring of this year, and of course, I know we're in the middle of the pandemic. And it was much worse then. It was much worse last year. So I think people also got in the habit of hanging out in social VR. But that's still an astounding number. Like that's, I don't know about you guys, but I was totally shocked when I saw that number. And then the next highest group was half of my social interaction takes place in VR environments. 31% of people said at least half their social interaction takes place in VR. I mean, think about that. That's amazing. That's an amazing number. Then a small percent of my social interaction takes place in VR environments. That was 19%. And there was 4.86% of people who said time spent in social VR is not real social interaction. So out of anything else that I present to you today, to me, this is the most fascinating statistic or statistics or specific question that I asked them and the answers I received, because it's fantastically shocking that so many people already who are using VR already rely on that for the primary source of social interaction. And I know from a personal perspective, I can definitely say that's true, because here I am sitting in what room? I'm in a bedroom in my headset, hanging out with you guys. And just to pause here for a second, I want to share a few stories with you. And this is directly related to social VR. But basically, I spent most of my life, I'm a writer by trade, I'm a journalist, and I definitely have done a lot of volunteer work, building communities and things, homeschool communities, different types of scouting type communities, and I've written 8 books. I mean, I've done a lot of stuff. I'm pretty adventurous and not very much afraid of anything. And so I don't have any problem, obviously, with social interaction. I'm definitely an extrovert. And so 2019, before the pandemic, I was on, I don't know, 3 continents, 12 different countries, traveling around, promoting VR and talking about it and putting the headset on people, giving them the opportunity to try VR. So that's what I did for about 7 months in 2019. Then last January, like 2 weeks before the pandemic, I ended up having a really bad personal situation and separated from my husband. It was just really traumatic. I won't even go there. But I will tell you that the amazing part of it was I still had my VR friends that I could go and chat with and go into those environments. And it gave me a bit of grounding. To be quite honest, sometimes I didn't really even want to be around them, but it was healthy to be around them. You know, like when you know something's good for you, but you really just want to crawl into a hole and scare yourself. And so I think that's another good thing about social VR, that you know those people are still there, just like if you have a group of friends in physical reality. But last year, in the middle of the pandemic, many of us didn't have that. We didn't have the access to that. So that's one of the great things about the headset. You can always put it on wherever you are and find those relationships and those people still there for you. So that's the good side of social VR. We've also had some issues that have raised concern for me. You know, we have a situation where, for the most part, in most of these environments, yes, we have social tools. Yes, you can block people, you can mute people, things like that. But you still have situations where people can touch you without your permission. They may harass you or say really negative things to you. And we talked about this the other day, and we talked about harassment and bullying in eSports and gaming. And so I won't go into that in too much detail, but I will say from the perspective of social VR that we need to be very careful, because as we move forward, we have such a great gift here, such a fantastic gift to be able to communicate with other humans like this across distance. And it doesn't even make any difference at all whether you're in Spain and I'm in Tennessee, or where we are, we can be friends and still relate. However, with that said, that also brings a certain amount of, just like with the internet, there is a certain anonymity there. And when you have people, let's say, the problems we have on traditional cyber platforms with the internet of people maybe grooming children and things like that, or taking advantage of elderly people. Those are problems we are not only going to have in social VR, but we're already having in social VR. So that's something that I think is very, very important for us to think about and address. We need to have safety protocols. It's not just, it's not enough to just have safety tools, because maybe the person doesn't know they need to block someone. Maybe a young 14-year-old girl doesn't know that it might not be a good idea to go into a private area with a guy who she doesn't know is really a 40-year-old and hang out. Okay? So these are things that are already happening. So we need to be aware of that as part of this whole discussion in social VR. How are we going to handle those issues and make sure that we are creating safe environments? Another thing that we have to think about with social interaction in a good way. I don't know if any of you have heard of Rendeavor, for example, but Rendeavor is for older people to have social interaction with other older people. Social interaction in VR isn't always like this, where you're always in the same room. Sometimes you have situations where, for example, with elderly people, they put on headsets and they go to the same place, but they're not really in the same place there. It shows the space in their headset, but in physical reality, they're just simply in the same room. So they're using this in some nursing homes and stuff now. That's still social VR. They're still experiencing the same thing, and then they take those headsets off and talk and communicate in physical reality. And that's a great thing about what I call social VR is the fact that, truthfully, it doesn't matter if you're in a Oculus Quest or HTC Vive or uh, Windows mixed reality headset or whatever headset you're in, or if you're interacting there on your phone or your PC, or if you're in a physical environment with a headset enjoying the experience. All that's social, and it's encouraging humans to interact. And so that's a fun, fantastic, wonderful thing and a way for us to relate to each other, because you can see families find that common interest and do something together, or you can make new friends. So all of these things are part of the overall picture. Back to harassment just a second. So in VR, in the survey that I did in the spring, 86.18% of users had experienced harassment in VR games. 86.18. Okay. Now, I don't know if that bothers anybody else, but that's like, that number really troubles me, because if I go to the grocery store, or if you go somewhere in town or whatever, typically I don't expect to be harassed or bullied. I don't expect someone to come stick their hand up my shorts or call me a TCH or anything like that. I'm going to traditional social environments, and people simply know that they shouldn't do those sorts of things. So in virtual reality, we have a situation where people are bringing negative mindsets from traditional internet interactions into the virtual environments. And to be quite blunt with you, it's up to us to stop that. These are our social worlds. These are our social worlds. And I know they've done a lot of things here in Allspace, and some of the different games have taken action or made tools where they can, do the best they can to start preventing some of those things. Most of the games that I hang out in regularly, pretty much, visit, I see that increasingly where they have created tools to make those things possible. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how many tools you create or how many rules you make, there has to be some sort of mindset from the community, from us overall as a society of people. You can call yourselves virtual people, or you can call yourselves people in a virtual environment, which is what we really are, right? I see your virtual avatars, but you're still people behind those headsets. And that's the thing we have to always remember. People need to keep that at the forefront of their minds, that you have humans behind the headsets, and it's up to us to decide, do we want to allow the humans to be harmed, or do we want to create situations where social VR is basically a mirror or replica of traditional environments where, from a moral or character perspective, we still expect basically decent behavior. Now, bear in mind that I'm not talking about, in no way am I trying to say, like, for example, um, we shouldn't be able to play shooting games. Well, shooting games are meant to be shooting games. That's why they were created. So, like, for example, I play Population 1. I love it. It's a fantastic game. And I definitely am going to shoot somebody if I have the opportunity in that game, because, I'm going to take down my opponent. But the same thing with Echo. Like, I play a lot of Echo VR. I'm known as a bruiser, which means I hit people. I assure you I don't go around hitting people in physical reality. Even if I sometimes would like to, I don't. And I do a lot of Echo, and it's perfectly fine. Same thing with, let's just be quite blunt here, sexual experiences. There are people who use VR and do that sort of thing in VR. If there are apps for that and they go to those locations and do that, that's their business. If they come into our public social areas and our social apps or games or whatever where other people are and do those things, that's what's not appropriate. Okay, like if you want to go to the local strip bar, I'm drawing a blank here. I know these have a word, so sorry. I realize at the moment everyone's probably laughing about this. I'm trying to think. Strip joint. Anyway, there's a word. You know what I'm talking about. If people want to go there in town, that's perfectly fine. But generally, you don't want to go to the DMV and start doing a lap dance on somebody. You're probably going to get arrested. Okay. So these are the kind of things we need to think about with social VR. Do we want to accept behavior that is commonly considered toxic or illegal or inappropriate, or do we want to just basically draw a line in the sand and say, you know what, there are places to do that, but this isn't the place. This is why certain games, and also headsets like Oculus, I know, has a code of conduct. Various big games, eSports, have codes of conduct. Most of the leagues have codes of conduct. And here, our social VR apps have codes of conduct, and those are important to follow. People need to be aware of those. Those are for the safety and protection of everyone. Now, here's another way to think about this. Some people say, oh, yeah, you're just trying to protect all those snowflakes. Okay, first of all, I greatly dislike disrespectful terminology like that, but I'm using it there because to make a point that that is basically a mindset that some people have. And I want to set something straight here. It's not just about protecting those people. It's also about protecting the person doing these behaviors. And here's why. If you have a situation on the internet where a grown person is grooming or makes arrangements or talks to a minor, and they, let's say, send inappropriate texts back and forth to them or pictures, that adult is then subject to federal charges for a crime because that's against the law. So the things that we're setting forth in social VR, the standards, it's not just to protect the other people. That's incredibly important. It's also to remind people that we're trying to keep everyone safe. This is bad for you as well. Like if you do these things, you could be in trouble. You can be charged with a crime. And so then that goes into some other issues, which we don't really have time to discuss today. That's kind of a different presentation. But basically, we have to decide, where do we draw the line? So already there are some things that are just point blank illegal online. And we have to decide, for example, some laws don't exist yet. That I'm not huge on legislating things. That's not something I necessarily approve of in most cases. But I do think, for example, as we consider the whole mindset of social VR, if you have an adult who is communicating with a child in text, inappropriate comments that violates law, say for example, obscenities to minors, how is that any different than an adult in a VR game sticking their crotch in a minor's face and doing inappropriate sexual actions? Obviously, it's different, but my point here is these are the kind of things we're going to have to address and discuss and think about as we move forward in social VR. They're important. And for me personally, I love VR. I think it's fantastic. I highly support it. And so those aren't necessarily the kind of things I want to discuss. But I do think I can't give a presentation on the state of social VR without at least bringing that up, because it is going to have to be addressed. Back to the slide just a second. Out of those 86% of users who had experienced harassment in VR games, most of them had experienced various types of harassment, such as verbal, sexual invasion of their personal space, and they had also experienced multiple instances of said harassment. This was a cool thing that I thought was really good. Of the people who responded to the survey, 77.87% of them stated that they felt like social standards for VR should be similar to those for physical reality. That includes racial or sexist slurs, inappropriate sexual behavior, and so on. That's encouraging, because I think even though we currently have to change the mindset that people should do something, not just be a passive bystander when they see things happening that shouldn't be happening, but this actually says that people do care. We just aren't quite there yet as far as activating it. And so that's something to keep in mind. Like I was encouraged by that number. I think it's good. Always remember the human behind the headset. I think that's incredibly important as we move forward in any of this. So the good and the bad. So for example, if you think about the good for VR, like the people in the motorhome I mentioned, or like my situation last year, I hopped in VR just to not be alone, because I knew that that wasn't healthy. I did not need to be alone certain times last year. And I think sometimes we do feel alone, and there are people in our society that are very isolated. So VR is great for all those people who, like I have a lot of friends, younger friends, teens and 20s, and they go hang out in VR because this is the new technology. They love it. They play their games. They go in there, and this is becoming as a natural, normal thing, like already after even just a few years. I think the pandemic incredibly accelerated that mindset, because they were stuck at home and didn't have a lot of choices, but they realized that it's a lot of fun, and there are so many opportunities to hang out that are easier than maybe in physical reality. They're more accessible. VR is incredibly accessible, and we have the opportunity to be inclusive. There's so many more things I could talk about here today, but basically I think that you just have to remember that we have many people out there with different needs, and they're all using social VR for various reasons. Some of the social VR experiences, I did want to say, like, for example, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Supernatural. When you go into Supernatural and you do a workout, you aren't particularly, you're not there with other real people like this, but you have that coach that looks like a live coach, and they're giving motivational feedback, and you're in a beautiful environment. And so it's very cool to feel like you're still with a person, even though, like right here now, it's really weird. Like, I know all of you are real people, so we could go and talk back and forth. Like in Supernatural, someone is giving you, it's a recording, but it's still, I think part of the reason that app is doing well is because it feels like it's real. And so she's giving you that feedback. And honestly, maybe sometimes you just don't want to talk to other people at a moment, but you still want to feel like there's really somebody there. And then you have the community at large with that app, where you can go and talk to each other on Facebook or the app or whatever. And it's the same thing with Beat Saber. When you go into Beat Saber multiplayer, as far as I'm aware, you can't actually communicate or talk with those people, except, for example, with motions and arm movements and stuff. And so I think it's hilarious how we go into all these different VR environments, and sometimes it doesn't even quite matter if it's interaction like with hot space or VR chat or Rec Room, whatever, where you're there back and forth with a person. Sometimes you just want to know there's somebody out there. And so a lot of these quote social apps still fulfill that, even though they're not technically created as social apps, they still provide some sort of social component, which is actually important as we continue to grow the ecosystem overall, because we need to recognize that people just want to feel like they're part of something greater with other humans, I think. So, as we move forward, I'll ask you a couple of questions real quick before I move on to questions. I think that it's important if we're going to, somebody told me, I think it was Laurel, said, the question of the metaverse is going to come up. And so here's the deal. Whether or not you like that term and whatever you think about it, it really doesn't matter. The thing of it is that we are creating immersive worlds. We're laying the foundation for an entire universe that we've never had before in the history of humanity. Like, we literally have the opportunity to do good with this and create something great, or we have the opportunity to really screw it up. And humans kind of have a little bit of a poor track record for screwing things up a bit. And so it's good for us all to remember that regardless of what part you play, what role you have, whether you're a developer, manufacturer, headset, creator, it doesn't matter. If you're a player, if you're a person who comes in and enjoys this casually, we all have the opportunity to make a positive impact on these worlds. And for those who actually have the opportunity in a bigger sense to impact larger groups of people, I always tell people, like, if you're a creator, for example, if you're a world creator or a developer, a game creator, or a headset manufacturer, that some of those kind of people really have almost like a God type status, in the sense of, I don't mean that to be a God. What I mean by that is a godlike status in the sense of creating something massively huge for future generations. That is a tremendous responsibility. And so I think, personally for me, when I talk to developers and different people in those positions, I think they kind of get the fact that what they're doing is important and they do have that responsibility. But the fact of the matter is, we as people, all of us, we're the ones who actually go out there and live it and engage in it. So it's up to us to really say, how do we want this to be? Are we going to accept poor practices? Are we going to make sure people are safe in these environments? Are we going to make sure that we have appropriate behaviors in social areas, and then areas where if people want to go do that there alone, they can? And with that said, at the same time, are you going to make sure that a minor's not being taken to those areas, for example? And does anybody even care? I mean, I care, but that's where the rest of us have to step up and really say, yes, we care. We want to do something about this, okay? So I think that these are all questions we're going to have to ask. How do we adjust to the changes that are taking place in our society? So, wow, the past year and a half, I have gone through more changes in my life than I think I did in the previous 49 years. I'm 51 this year. And so I know I sound younger. Most people think I'm like 20. But remember, I've written a few books. I have 5 kids. I was married for a really long time. And so it's one of those things where I'm older than I sound. But we have an obligation to decide, how are we going to adjust and help others adjust to these new realities? This is what I mean by that. When we go through changes or experiences, I always tell people, like, we spend a lot of time and energy, and this is a little bit personal, but bear with me a second. We spend a lot of time and energy explaining to youth what to expect when they go into adolescence. what to expect for puberty. And I'm telling you, I'm getting ready to hit menopause, and like nobody talked to me. Everything I'm learning, I'm either looking up on or I learn from my friends who I've now decided are fantastic resources because I never really thought about it before. But it's one of those things where I think we put an inordinate amount of energy into certain things and not other things. So we are entering a phase where we are going to have people in VR who are learning to express themselves in whole new ways. I thought it was hilarious because Lance had on a different outfit over there. He had on a different avatar outfit when we first started here, and it was totally stressing him out. So he couldn't introduce me. That was part of the reason there was a slight delay. He couldn't introduce me till he changed. And so I think that, I actually changed my skin tone. I went and changed my clothes because my glasses were red, and I was like, I really don't like red glasses. I want to wear black glasses. But we are going to have situations where we need to help people adjust to these new realities. How is this going to affect their mindset? If you're in a social VR environment and someone is trash talking you, or you have people ganging up on you and bullying you and saying bad things to you because you're a female, or because you have a voice as an accent, or because you simply are a bad player, or they don't like your avatar, whatever. Wow, guys, I'm telling you, these are all questions I have to think about as we move forward because they're happening already. And so, we need people to really consider social VR is so fantastic and lovely and beautiful, but we need people to recognize that, again, I'll keep saying it, we're humans behind the headsets. We can't just go out there and do whatever we want. So our greatest obligation should always be to do no harm to others. And, obviously I personally would prefer to say, is it for good? Do good with this. But at the same time, at the very least, people need to be willing to say, let's do no harm. So I wanted to finish up there and take a few minutes for questions. We have about 12 minutes for questions, so you can ask whatever you like, and there's plenty of time for that. I definitely think that social VR is absolutely fantastic. Hopefully you had a little bit of insight there that maybe you didn't have before. And feel free to ask me whatever you would like. I'll do my best to answer you. So click to raise your hand. Lance is trying to help me. Can you help click on them if they raise their hand, Lance?
Yeah, so I was trying to get myself amplified. So, yes, if anyone has any questions, click the button at the bottom right-hand corner that says raised hand, and we will call on you. So the first question is Teresa. You should be up. There you go.
Have you ever been kicked out of a video game just because you were female? I've heard that sometimes whenever females try to play games that mostly guys like shooting games, whenever if the female player chooses to try to communicate with the other players by like using their microphone, whenever they hear a female's voice, they're like, "Oh no, there's a girl in here. Let's kick her out." And
yeah, that's
I was
definitely
just wondering,
an issue,
has
I think.
anything like that happened to you?
Well, to me personally, I've had all kinds of things happen. It's insane. But I do think that that's an issue where we're going to have to, as we move forward, unfortunately, we're going to see the same sorts of prejudices carrying over from physical reality. So if, and actually in some ways it's even worse because people feel like because of the anonymity, they can do or say whatever they want. And so someone who might not go into a physical reality environment and harass a woman, for example, might go into VR and have no problem with going up to a female physically or saying, I don't want you to play on our team, get out of here, or whatever. Like they have no problem doing that. However, I will say, and we had this, I can't remember if you were in the meeting on Friday, but one of our ladies there made the comment that you really get to see what people's true selves are in VR. And I definitely think that's true. So, for example, if you have a youth who is seemingly rather respectful and stuff, but they go into VR and they're insulting little kids and calling women bad names, refusing to play with certain people and stuff, then you're really seeing their character there. It's not just about anonymity. I mean, we really reveal our true selves more, I think. And that's one of the great things about social VR, though, because you have people like, for example, I'm sure some of you have seen studies, people with autism, they can actually look and communicate and not have the same problems or reactions doing that in a VR environment where they may not be able to do that in a physical environment. And so that gives them the ability. Some of them have actually started moving out of that a little more physical reality. But the point is that in VR, we tend to focus more on personality and the person behind that headset versus the physical things. But I definitely think in regards to female players or anyone who sounds different or anything like that, that we have a long way to go still. Like we really do. There's a lot of still prejudice toward women in gaming and in the tech industry in general, I think. Any other questions?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Like I did there. All right, so the next question is Laurel.
Oh, this is so fascinating. I cannot tell you, Sonia, how amazing this is and the information. And I'm
Thank you.
I'm curious about um, with these statistics and things, what's been the response of developers and the different platforms? Is anything happening in response to the numbers of these surveys and things? And so that's question number one. Take that first, and then I have a second follow up.
So just to be clear, I don't work for any developers or platforms or anyone. I basically am a freelance journalist and someone who's incredibly interested in the topics related to virtual reality and VR communities. I do consider myself a community manager. And so I am more than happy to give any type of feedback to different people in the industry, whether that's developers or uh, platform creators or whoever. So I just want to make that clear right off the bat. But it's my impression that they do listen. And sometimes that doesn't always seem very obvious to outsiders. So, or somebody who's not in their inner circle. And so, for example, what I look for are changes to the design of games or platforms themselves, or even like headsets, like the reporting tools that Oculus added, things like that. I look for those sorts of things to see, are these people actually listening to anything that's being said? And so I think that they actually are. And you also can kind of gauge, like sometimes because I deal a lot with the community members and the overall community. I also watch for tone, Aurel. Like tone's important. What is the tone of this community right now? And you and I've talked about this privately some. Man, I get doggone frustrated sometimes with the bad attitudes, people just being prejudiced, racist, sexist, and all these horrible things. It is so incredibly sad. And I probably get an inordinate amount of harassment and bullying just because there's several problems here. And I say problems like sincerely. I'm just, quote, not right. I'm female. I'm older. I play seated. I'm well spoken. I'm educated. Like there are a lot of things that just don't fit people's idea of, well, we can basically do whatever we want around this female. I stand up for people who are being harassed or bullied. I speak out if somebody is doing that. So I do think that we can all adapt and change and try to improve ourselves. And I do try to do that. But at the same time, I think that we see a lot of that with targeted bullying and harassment. So when I see some of those attitudes change or improve, Burrell, this is specifically to answer your question. When I see those attitudes and things change because there have been improved reporting measures or ways to make sure that we reduce some of that, to me that says, okay, we're doing what we can right now. But we still have a long way to go with the overall mindset that certain people don't belong in VR. Because I tell you, every week I hear it. Why do you even play games? Why are you even here? You're an old woman. First of all, I'll say I'm not old. I'm, I don't consider myself old at all. But I also think that it's important for people to know that that statement is incredibly sexist and prejudiced. So, one day when I can say, it's been a month since I heard that, then I'll be even happier because I'll be like, wow, we're even making better impact. Okay, what's your next question?
Wow, you answered most of it already, but I guess I just you talked a little bit about how our behavior is going to make things be different. If we want change, we have to initiate it ourselves. But how do we have our voices really heard? How can we be a part of this movement to bring sportsmanship and respect back in? I mean, there's teasing, there's picking, there's all that kind of stuff. It's part of the game, but there's a lot that isn't. The nasty stuff has got to go. The toxicity has got to go away. So what can we do to really affect change? Thanks. You were so awesome.
Thank you. I think that is a fantastic question. And there are going to be people who don't agree with my answer, just say off the bat. But I did foster care for like 15 years, okay? And when I first started doing foster care, I want to tell you the story really fast. I actually was so naive. Like, I was so naive. And because I trust people, I love people. Like, I really sincerely like people. I think everybody has something to offer. They're on this earth for a reason. You all have a contribution to make. There's a gift you haven't discovered, or maybe you have. I mean, people are just fantastic. And so, like the very first foster girl we had, she was 13. She had gotten pregnant when she was 12. And I took care of pregnant teens. That was specifically the group that I offered to care for in our home. And I kept smelling smoke, like cigarette smoke. And she insisted she wasn't smoking. I was like, wow, that's really weird. And she was like, yeah, it must be coming off my clothes when I came home from school. I was like, wow, that's really strong. And so I went down the bathroom one day and I swear it had smoke all over it. And she's like, well, I don't know how that got here. And I'm like, wow, that's really weird. And so, yes, go ahead and laugh at me. I laugh at myself. And then I went to flush the toilet later in that same bathroom, and it literally overflowed with cigarette butts. There were like so many cigarette butts falling all over my bathroom floor. And it was shocking to me because I honestly never expected someone to point blank to my face lie to me. It just isn't something I do to people. And so I never thought about other people doing that to me. That was a situation I encountered throughout the 15 years. I had to be careful because I expected a certain behavior from them that they weren't capable of. They didn't know not to lie to my face or do certain behaviors that they had been raised to think were okay. And I think in the case of social VR, it's not that we want to be other people's moral balance. However, sometimes people do need to know where certain behaviors are appropriate or not. And so that's up to us to educate them. And also, we've talked privately, you and I, that sometimes people also, like with those girls in other situations, there are people out there who are just hurting people. They're sad. Maybe there's a lack of, they don't know what the options are. So they do things they shouldn't because she didn't know not to lie to me. She had only ever been taught to lie. There are people like that in VR who maybe the only thing they've ever heard is a woman referred to as a bitch, for example. Okay. Yes, I don't curse. I've tried. I seriously can't do it. So that's why I spell it out. It's not for anybody else's benefit. It's just not words that are natural to me. And so, they grow up hearing this and they think that that's what they call women. So they're having situations, for example, in VR where I say, that's like so incredibly disrespectful. If you think I'm a bad player, just say, wow, you didn't do a good job there, or whatever. If you don't like my voice, mute me. If you don't want to play with a female, then mute me and pretend that I'm not. Who really knows the difference? I'm a great player. I mean, like, I think there are ways we can educate people. But then there are also things we need to make sure we set a standard for. This is absolutely, completely, totally not acceptable here. Things like uh, abuse, racism, sexism, sexual activity, stuff like that in public areas. Those aren't even negotiable. Like those should be things that we all agree. We don't want this in society. Look how many problems we have right now in the United States with these problems around the world as well, globally, but especially in the US. Oh my gosh. It's like, and people, I live in Tennessee, I live in the South. Like, I can't even begin to tell you. I stay alone in my trailer because people scare me sometimes. And so it's just one of those things where I think it's that we have the opportunity to change that in immersive worlds. So we have to decide, are we going to, are we not? You know? I don't know if that answered the second question, Laurel, but hopefully at least a little bit of it. Was there one last question before we go? I'm going to give my
Yes.
answer.
Yes, I was going to say the last question is actually me. I'm already
Okay.
amplified, so I don't want to amplify myself. Okay, so the question I have is, are you seeing any different statistics in VR and gaming?
VR versus traditional gaming.
Yeah. No?
So part of the reason I
Sorry,
did that.
social VR and gaming. There, sorry.
So in traditional social VR environments
VR.
versus VR gaming environments.
Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, I see. The answer to that is no. So the basically, I think there's still the same issues there that everybody's facing. You know, how do we deal with the personal space issues and stuff? I did want to go back to this, kind of is to you as well, but also Laurel's question. The thing that I had a problem with most, that I think I actually forgot to say because I got off track, was that I am not a fan of using tools as an excuse. We spend way too much time putting the burden on the person being harassed or bullied or otherwise in some way mistreated. That needs to stop. Like, if someone is being harassed, bullied, or mistreated, whether it's in a social VR environment or an eSports, a tournament, or whatever, we should not say, well, you could put on your personal bubble, you could mute yourself, you could report them. Like, that's so bad. I mean, no, the fact of the matter is that those people should not ever feel like they have the freedom to abuse other people. And so I think it's an important point that we need to make sure we keep in mind as we progress. And anyway, Lance, I think no, there's really not much difference there in the two. There are going to be different ways it's manifested. So, for example, in a social environment like I wouldn't even name any specific ones, but let's say you have a social environment where people are going around and being really, really inappropriate to someone's avatar because they can, and they've got 12 other people that come over and decide to do the same thing. Well, that's no healthier long term than an esports environment where you have a team of 5 or 6 people in a game going and telling a 13-year-old kid that he's trash and should never pick up a headset again. Neither of those things is healthy. See, so it may manifest differently, but we just need to make sure we're aware that those are still negative things. I do want to end on something positive though, and say that same thing with social VR environments. I have seen people do amazingly good things where they go and they talk to a person who's depressed and considering suicide, and they talk them down. They talk them off the ledge and say, you know, I might just be here dressed up like a piece of toast, but I care that you exist, dude. You know, like you're alive for a reason. You know, in some of the games I play, I've been in games where people said, just come play. You know, we're just glad you're here. Like, you make a difference. We like to hear your laugh, or, you know, we're happy that you're part of this community. That's the beauty of social VR, that we really need to make sure we reduce negative while increasing the positive. So thank you all for attending today. That was great. And I hope that Yeah, well, if you're interested and want to share that after, I think that they'll have that on the YouTube for Educators in VR. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with anyone. And thanks a lot for coming.
Oh yeah. So yes, thank you for coming to the cyberbullying. Um, so coming up next in an hour is actually a special event with Educators in VR with Jimmy, a senior software developer, discussing AltSpace VR and the metaverse. He'll give us a look at the history of where AltSpace VR has been and actually what we have accomplished and how it works under the hood. He will also talk about the metaverse and AltSpace VR and this right here is actually a two-parter to the special event for this week and next week. So you don't want to miss it. Also, have we have a event moderation training in just a couple of hours here to help you be able to learn how to improve your moderation and event hostings. So don't miss that. And if you want any more information, you can find it at the AltVR channel on the website, and especially at altvr.com. So yeah, sorry, educators in VR channel, and then the educatorsinvr.com. So and
Thank you
and
so
thank
much,
you,
Lance.
Sonya, for being here. So woo.
Thank you. Woo.